Okay, we are ready. We're live. And we can start the trial whenever you're ready.
Pretrial matters, Plaintiff, Your Honor.
Good afternoon. We're on the record in Part S. This is Rogers versus Mars, docket number 0LT2020. Could I have appearances for the plaintiff, please?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Julia Grieve, and along with my co-counsel, Mr. Alex Millard, we represent the plaintiff in this case, Ms. Stevie Rogers.
Very good. For the defendant?
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Julie Howard, and I, along with my co-counsel, Mr. Kendall Beard, will be representing the defendant in this case, Ms. Drew Mars.
Very good. Anything before we begin?
Yes, Your Honor. Pretrial matters from the plaintiff.
Of course.
We'd like to bring the court's attention to pretrial order number 16, where Judge Page ruled that exhibits 1 through 7 are pre-admitted and can be used at any time in trial.
16 or 17?
That would be
The 16 I have refers to the Fifth Amendment.
17, Your Honor. My apologies.
No worries. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. That's fine. You may have to remind me of that fact, but we're good on that point. Anything else?
Yes, given the unique nature of the competition, we'd like to screen share exhibits for authentication purposes before they're admitted into evidence. We just ask all documents be kept constructively outside the view of the jury until they're admitted.
Of course, that's fine.
And we'd just like to ask your preferences on displaying those documents. Would you like us to ask your permission, or should we go ahead and share them?
You can share whatever you like as long as you've shown it to your adversary beforehand.
Yes, Your Honor. With that, we're ready to go.
Anything for the defendant?
Just one more thing, Your Honor, pertaining to this new Zoom format. Because of the limitations of Zoom, would it be okay if we stayed seated for our objection arguments today?
That's fine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further from the defense. We're ready for opening statements.
Okay. The court officer has given me a script. I just want to make sure that I'm following it here. I think everybody should hide all non-video participants. We did that. We'll take opening statements now. Everyone should make sure they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right of your screen, and attorneys are asked to mute their audio when the other attorney is speaking. And so with that, we'll hear an opening statement from the plaintiff.
May I proceed? The defendant, she was running out of time. It's August 14th, 2018, and a woman named Agatha Lee is preparing for bed in her home. She finishes her dinner and takes the pills set out for her by her caretaker, Drew Mars. But this night, August 14th, it's different. You see, just 1 month earlier, Agatha Lee's only granddaughter, Stevie Rogers, she moved back home. The two hadn't seen each other for nearly 10 years, but by that time, it didn't matter. Agatha spent hours with her granddaughter every day, talking, laughing, and on August 14th, she decided she was going to change her will, leave her entire estate, nearly $20 million, to Stevie Rogers. She never got the chance to change that will. On the morning of August 15th, 2018, Agatha Lee was found dead. You'll learn that she was poisoned with chloroandramine. It's an over-the-counter drug that Agatha Lee was deathly allergic to. You'll learn that she was given that chloroandramine by the very person who she trusted to take care of her, the defendant, Drew Mars. Because the defendant was running out of time. He was running out of time because if Agatha Lee was able to change her will, well, that would mean taking the defendant out of it. That's why we've decided to sue the defendant today for the death of Agatha Lee. My name is Alex Millard, and along with my co-counsel, we represent the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers. We've brought our suit today under the Slayer statute. It's a law which states that anyone who is found to have killed a person, well, they can't then inherit that person's estate. As a plaintiff, we have to show to you today that the defendant killed Agatha Lee and that she did so knowingly or purposefully. Now, I want to be clear. This is not a murder trial. The burden in today's case was actually lower than what you might think. As a plaintiff, we have to prove to you today that based on the evidence, it's simply more likely true than not that the defendant killed Agatha Lee. This burden, a proof by the preponderance of the evidence, it lies solely with us as the plaintiff. By the end of today's trial, we'll meet that burden by explaining to you why the defendant killed Miss Lee, how she did it, and what evidence she left behind. Today, we'll expect that you'll meet the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers. She'll explain to you that in February of 2018, she received a letter from her grandmother explaining that Drew Mars, her caretaker, the defendant, would be placed in her will. After receiving this letter, you'll learn that Stevie Rogers moved back in with Agatha Lee, and the two rekindled their relationship. She'll tell you that on August 14th, 2018, her grandmother told her that she would be changing her will to leave everything to Stevie Rogers. You'll learn that the defendant, well, she overheard that conversation. She overheard how she was going to be taken out of the will. She knew she was running out of time. You'll also meet Mr. Bond. He's a private investigator hired in today's case, and we'll expect that he'll walk you through his investigation, explaining how Agatha Lee was given chlorandramine on the night of August 14th, 2018. You'll read the autopsy in today's case, which states that the sole cause of Agatha Lee's death was that chlorandramine, and that whoever gave her that chlorandramine, they intended to kill her. After telling you how Agatha Lee was killed, well, Mr. Bond will explain that he searched the entire residence, and he found one bottle of chlorandramine pills. But that chlorandramine, the murder weapon in today's case, he found it in the defendant's closet. The defendant knew that she was going to be taken out of Agatha Lee's will, knew that Agatha Lee had an allergy to chlorandramine, and was the only person in possession of chlorandramine in the entire residence. The defendant was running out of time. That's why at the end of today's trial, we'll ask you to find the defendant liable for the death of Agatha Lee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Millard. Does the defendant wish to make an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You can proceed whenever.
Your Honor, members of the jury, opposing counsel, may it please the court. She was the one in the way because she was the one in the will. Members of the jury, Drew Mars was the one that helped Agatha Lee after she suffered a severe heart attack. Miss Mars was the one that would make breakfast with Agatha Lee every Saturday morning as they sang their hearts out to Frank Sinatra. Drew Mars was the one that would hold Agatha Lee every year on the anniversary of Miss Lee's daughter's death. Miss Drew Mars wasn't just a caretaker. She was family. Now, Mr. Miller and the plaintiff just got up here and told you a story about how Stevie Rogers loved his grandmother. But members of the jury, rest assured, Miss Rogers didn't love her grandmother for who she was, but for what she had. To Stevie Rogers, Drew Mars was the one between her and her inheritance. To Stevie Rogers, Drew Mars was the one separating her from $20 million. Drew Mars was the one in the way. And Miss Rogers would stop at nothing to get her out of the picture. Now, members of the jury, we agree with Mr. Miller. Someone did murder Agatha Lee. But that someone isn't named Drew Mars. That someone is going to testify today for the plaintiff. Now, Mr. Miller told you a little bit about the Slayer statute. And members of the jury, you're going to learn today that Miss Rogers knew about the Slayer statute. And once she understood that she wasn't going to get her will, well, that just didn't cut it for her. She had to find a way. But Miss Rogers couldn't do it by herself. You're going to hear in today's testimony that Miss Rogers actually hired a private investigator to help her carry out her plan to enact the Slayer statute today. Now, you might be asking yourself, why? Why would Miss Rogers plan to kill her grandmother? Well, you're going to learn today that Miss Rogers was living lavish. She had blown through $2 million of her trust fund. But members of the jury, what's $2 million when you're set to inherit $20 million? Or so she thought. We're going to learn today that Miss Lee actually wrote her a letter. And in this letter, Miss Rogers discovers that she's no longer in the will and that she's not leaving her a dime. Well, Miss Rogers didn't know what to do. Miss Rogers was broke. Miss Rogers needed a plan. And she planned the perfect murder. And who else depended on but the person in the way? She was the one in the way because she was the one in the will. Now, members of the jury, the plaintiff has the burden today. It won't be shifted or transferred in the entirety of the case. And that burden of proof that they have to prove to you before today is by a preponderance of the evidence, which means more likely than not. And now, Mr. Miller really downplayed how much they have to prove to you. But today they have to prove to you that it was more likely than not that Drew Mars was involved in the death of Agatha Lee. And Mr. Miller and the plaintiff just can't tell you that. They have a responsibility to prove it. Now, members of the jury, you're going to learn about what happened today. And I want you to listen closely in the trial when we talk about the strained relationship between Agatha Lee and Stevie Rogers. You're going to hear today from Miss Mars that she hadn't seen Stevie Rogers in years. And there was no communication. Agatha Lee had grown apart. We're also going to hear from Rhyan Cabrera today, Agatha Lee's biography writer. And he's going to tell you that he never saw Stevie Rogers while he wrote the book. Now, Mr. Miller said something extremely interesting. And I want you to listen closely in trial to the conversation that Miss Lee had with Miss Rogers. You see, members of the jury, Miss Mars is going to tell you that she heard that conversation. And in that conversation, Miss Lee said that she wasn't leaving him a dime. You're going to learn today that as soon as Miss Rogers walked out of that room and she saw Miss Mars, she looked at her and said, "Don't count your millions yet." Members of the jury, what did she mean? What did she mean as she walked out of that room and told her, "Don't count your millions yet"? I want you to consider something as you listen to the prosecution's theory all trial long. Consider Stevie Rogers' motive. Consider that one of their main witnesses was actually hired by Stevie Rogers. Members of the jury, the law requires you to consider if the evidence they present to you today is credible. She was the one in the way because she was the one in the will. And now at the conclusion of today's trial, you're going to go into that deliberation room. And members of the jury, I want you to think about something. I want you to think, who was there for Agatha Lee when she needed her the most? And who came back when they needed money? Members of the jury, at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Julie Howard, is going to walk you through all the evidence and ask you to find the only verdict that the evidence supports, not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beard. All right, I'm supposed to remind everybody to switch to gallery view with the button, which you'll know by now is in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. This will allow you to see the attorneys and witnesses at the same time. I'm going to follow my own advice. And are we ready for the people's first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Stevie Rogers.
Very good. Good afternoon, Ms. Rogers. Mr. Millard, you can. And who's crossing this witness? Is there?
I'll be the attorney crossing this witness, Your Honor. My name is Ms. Howard.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Howard. Mr. Millard, whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Of course. Hello, my name's Stephanie Rogers, but everyone calls me Stevie.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm 33 years old. I'm originally from San Francisco, but I've lived all over the world at this point. I live here in Midlands now.
Are you living with family here?
No. I was living with my Nana, my grandmother, Agatha Lee, but she passed away 2 years ago.
Let's talk a bit more about your grandmother, Agatha Lee. Were you close with her?
Growing up, yes. We spent so much time together, playing backgammon, cooking in her kitchen, going on trips. I saw Nana every single summer in Alabama. It was always the highlight of the year.
You said that growing up you were close. Did that relationship change?
I hadn't thought so. I mean, after my parents were killed, I retreated. I didn't visit as much. I rarely called her. But I still thought we were close. When you have a bond with someone like that, Nana seemed to think that we'd grown apart.
What do you mean?
Well, back in 2018, in February, she sent me a letter where she told me that she was upset that I distanced myself and she was angry.
Ms. Grieve, could we display Exhibit 10? Ms. Rogers, what's up on your screen right now?
That's the letter I was just mentioning, the one from Nana in February of 2018.
And is it a fair and accurate copy of that letter?
As I remember it, yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we move Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection from the defense, Your Honor.
Exhibit, I'm sorry, is it 10 or 18?
10.
10. Plaintiff's Exhibit 10 is admitted on consent.
Ms. Rogers, what exactly did your grandmother say to you in this letter?
Well, she said she thought we'd become family in name only. And because of that, she was going to take me out of her will and leave everything to Drew Mars.
At the time that you received this letter, in February of 2018, did you know the defendant?
No, not really. I mean, yes, I knew that Drew Mars was Nana's caretaker, but We never really met.
After receiving this letter, did you go visit your grandmother?
Yes, I did. Not immediately, but I did go on July 4th of 2018.
Why did you go on July 4th of that year?
Well, the letter itself, it brought back a lot of emotion. Made me think about where I'd gone right and where I'd gone wrong. Made me consider the kind of granddaughter and daughter I'd been. You see, that year was the 10-year anniversary of my parents' death, of July 4th specifically. So in the moment, everything just crystallized. And it made me miss Nana more than I had in a long time.
You said you started staying with her on the 4th. How long did you live with Agatha Lee?
From July 4th until her death in August.
Ms. Rogers, let's focus on what happened the day before she died, August 14th. To your knowledge, who was at Agatha Lee's mansion on August 14th, 2018?
The only people I saw were the people who lived there. So that's me, Nana, and Drew Mars.
Okay. How did August 14th begin for you?
Nana and I, we had breakfast together in the study. We were talking, reminiscing. She told me she was so happy that I'd come back. It really started to feel like old times again.
Objection, hearsay.
Your response?
Yes, Your Honor. This goes to a state of mind, then existing mental condition, 8033. Agatha Lee said that she was happy and things felt like old times. That goes to her state of mind.
Your Honor, may I be heard on that?
Ma'am?
Your Honor, this isn't necessarily going to Agatha Lee's state of mind. Now, the statement itself was that Agatha was so happy that Stevie Rogers came back. Now, they're just using that to prove that Agatha Lee actually was happy that she came back. But the problem is there's no foundation that they can lay that that statement is actually true.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Sure.
Pursuant to 8033, it's an exception to hearsay. We are conceding that we are using this for the truth of the matter, but 8033 applies because she's talking about her then existing mental condition and her feeling happy that her granddaughter had returned.
Your Honor,
That's sufficient foundation.
Sorry, Your Honor, may I be heard on that?
Briefly, sure.
Your Honor, in 8033, it says that the exception can't be used to prove a belief on part of the declarant. Now, this is clearly a belief on the part of the declarant that she actually was happy that her granddaughter came back.
It seems to me to fall within the exception. The objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Rogers, after your grandmother told you that she was happy you would come home, what else did she say?
Nana told me that she wanted to draw up a new will and wanted to leave everything to me.
At the time she told you she wanted to draw up a new will, did you know if that would mean anyone else would be taken out of her will?
Well, sure. From the letter you just showed me earlier today, I knew Drew Mars would get taken out.
Ms. Rogers, let's be clear about the timing of everything here. Your Honor, permission to display a demonstrative to the jury?
Sure. Your colleague has seen this?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very good.
Yes, Your Honor, I have.
Ms. Rogers, at what time did your grandmother tell you she was changing her will?
In the morning on August 14th, 11:30.
Let the record reflect we're adding a tag which states that Agatha Lee told Rogers she would be leaving her entire estate to her at 11:30 a.m. During this conversation, when Agatha Lee told you that she would be changing her will, was anyone else in the room?
Well, inside the room, no. But as soon as Nana and I walked outside, Drew Mars was sitting right there.
Did the defendant say anything to you then?
No, looking back on it, I and hardly believed she did. But she turned to me and she mouthed the words, "No way."
And at what time did the defendant mouth "no way" to you?
Right after that conversation at 11:30.
Let the record reflect we're adding another tag to the timeline, which states that the defendant mouths "no way" to Rogers at 11:30 a.m. So after the defendant mouthed "no way" to you, when did you next see your grandmother, Agatha Lee?
After she got back from lunch, early afternoon sometime. I remember we watched a movie together, then had dinner, and said goodnight fairly early, or around 9:30.
Did you see the defendant anytime after 9:30 p.m.?
Yes, not even 5 minutes, I want to say. After I said goodnight to Nana, I saw Drew Mars walking towards Nana's room.
Let the record reflect that we're adding a tag to the timeline, which states that the defendant was seen walking toward Agatha Lee's room around 9:35 p.m. We can take this down now, Ms. Grieve. Do you know what the defendant was doing when you saw her around 9:35?
Well, I have my thoughts, but no, I don't know for sure. All I saw was Drew walking toward Nana's room with her hands like this, like she might have been holding something.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that the witness has held up her hand with her palm up and her fingers curled in.
Yeah,
Ms. Rogers, did you see your grandmother again after you saw the defendant walking towards her room?
No, I didn't. I never saw Nana alive again.
Ms. Rogers, let's talk a bit more about your grandmother's passing. When did you learn that she had died?
That next morning, August 15th.
When did you wake up on the 15th?
8:30, 8:35. I didn't wake up. Drew Mars woke me up. She was pounding on the door. I shot up. I raced to go open it.
Did the defendant say anything to you then?
She did. She told me that Nana wasn't waking up. In the moment, it felt like time had stopped. Didn't know what she meant. All I remember doing was pushing past Drew and running to Nana's room.
What did you see when you got to your grandmother's room?
She didn't have a pulse. Nana looked lifeless.
So what did you do?
I called the police. I didn't understand why Drew hadn't. Nana looked dead.
Do you know how she died?
I do now. I read the autopsy report, and I know she died from a chlorandramine poisoning.
Ms. Grieve, could we display that timeline again? Ms. Rogers, according to the autopsy, at what time did your grandmother die?
Sometime between 9 p.m. on the 14th and 3 in the morning on August 15th.
Let the record reflect we're adding a tag which states the time of death was between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. We can take that down now, Ms. Grieve. You mentioned that your grandmother died from chloroandramine. Did you know your grandmother had a chloroandramine allergy?
I didn't know my entire life, for 30 years, until about 2 weeks before she passed away.
How did you learn about this allergy?
Drew Mars told me about it when I moved back in with Nana. One day, out of the blue, we were just sitting in the sitting area, and Drew told me that Agatha had a fatal allergy to chlorandramine, that she took even one pill, she'd be dead.
Let's shift gears a bit here and talk about the reading of your grandmother's will. What day was that?
August 20th, about a week later.
Your Honor, at this time, we're displaying a copy of what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 9. What is this on your screen, Ms. Rogers?
That's the will. It's the will that they read on August 20th.
Is a fair and accurate copy of that will?
As I remember it, yes.
We move to enter Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Plaintiff's Exhibit 9 is admitted on consent.
Ms. Rogers, what were the terms of this will according to this document?
Drew Mars inherited the entire estate. Guess Nana had kept everything the way she said she would in that letter to me back in February.
After this will was read, you sued Drew Mars for the death of your grandmother. Why?
Drew Mars is the person who told me about Nana's chloroandramine allergy. Drew Mars was my Nana's caretaker in charge of her medications. Nana had told me she was leaving everything to Drew. And the day after Nana and I talk about changing her will, she dies? I don't believe it's a coincidence.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready. I only have the witness on my screen. Is that what's supposed to be happening?
Yes, Your Honor. Sorry, I had to move my chair.
That's okay. No worries.
May I proceed?
Please.
Miss Rogers, when Drew Mars was written into your grandmother's will, you lost over $20 million. Is that right?
Objection,
No.
Your Honor, argumentative.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
There's no need. The objection's overruled.
So, Miss Rogers, is that correct? That when Drew Mars was written into that will, you lost $20 million?
No, I didn't have $20 million.
Oh, Miss Rogers, you know that your grandmother's estate was worth over $20 million, right?
I know that now, yes.
That wasn't even including her house, right?
That's right. You know, back then I didn't know exactly how much Nana was worth. I knew it was in the millions, but her entire estate was worth a lot of money.
That wasn't even including her best-selling books, the right to those, right?
Right.
Up until 2018, you were the sole inheritor of all of that money. Isn't that true?
I believed I would be. I didn't have any of it, so I don't know what you mean.
But in June 2018, you needed that money, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
Well, Miss Rogers, you say you just went to your grandmother's house because you missed her that summer. But isn't it true that your trust fund had just run out?
The liquid cash was almost out. I still had a few $1,000s, but the trust fund itself was almost empty.
But Miss Rogers, you had just burned through over $2 million. Isn't that true?
Well, I hadn't just burned through it. I had a decade to spend it all.
But that's true that you had just run out of that money.
Like I said, I hadn't run out, but in June, it was at $2,000. That's correct.
Miss Rogers, you went to go see your grandmother in the same month that your trust fund ran out. Isn't that true?
No, I actually went the next month in July.
But you tried to go see your grandmother the same month that your trust fund ran out. You just couldn't find her. Isn't that right?
That's right. That's why I first hired a private investigator.
That was the first time that you had gone to see your grandmother in over 10 years.
That's correct.
It had been so long, you didn't even know where to look for her.
That's right. I had to hire a private investigator. You know, I realized how upset Nana was with me when she wrote me out, when she told me that we became family in name only. She made it difficult to find her. You know, she didn't leave a return address. So I did what I could to try to see her again. And I'm glad I did.
So now you're saying that after you went to go see your grandmother that summer, she just wrote you back into that will, right?
she didn't. That's why we're here.
Well, she tried to, is what you're saying, right? She had a conversation with you about it?
Right. I don't know if she ever got the chance to try before she was killed, but she told me that she wanted to.
Miss Rogers, I want to talk to you a little bit about that letter that your grandma sent you before that. Do you remember the line, "But I think I've done you a great disservice," in that letter?
Yes. Oh, yes. I remember Nana telling me that she thought all these years living off of my parents' money and her being so generous was a disservice to me, that I needed to make a start of my own on my own 2 feet.
Your grandmother said, "And all the times you called asking for money, I've never said no. But you just turned 31, you never had a job, and you're still treating grandma as your own personal ATM to fund whatever pops into your head." Is that what was written in that letter?
Right. Yes.
But now you're saying that after 10 years of not visiting her, and after 10 years after that letter was written, she was just going to write you back into that will?
I'm sorry, ma'am. You cut out a bit. I couldn't hear you.
Now you're saying that after 10 years of not visiting your grandmother, she was just going to hand over her entire estate to you?
I don't know exactly what she was going to do. I know what she told me about. And on August 14th, she told me that she wanted to change her will.
Miss Rogers, I just want to be clear about something. Other than your word, we don't have any evidence that that's how that conversation actually happened.
Objection, speculation.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes.
I can rephrase the question.
Yeah, I think that question is actually argumentative. I'll sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss Rogers, other than your word, you can't provide us with any evidence that that conversation actually happened.
No. Well, you mean like notes or a voice memo? No.
For all we know, your grandmother told you she was never putting you back in that will.
That's not what she said.
But for all we know, she could have told you that Drew Mars would always be the one in that will.
I don't know what you know, ma'am. All I know is what she told me. And you're right. I don't have any notes or a voice memo of that conversation.
Miss Rogers, if that had happened, that would have been okay. Because you knew another way to get that money, didn't you?
No.
Miss Rogers, you knew about the Slayer statue.
Yes, I did. I had gone to law school for a little bit before I dropped out.
You knew that if you could convince a court that Drew Mars killed your grandmother, you would get everything.
Objection, Your Honor, argumentative.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Sure.
Your Honor, I'm just asking about her knowledge about that statute before her grandmother's death. It's our argument today that she actually filed this lawsuit with the intent of getting that money, and that she was actually the one who murdered Miss Lee. Now, if she had knowledge that she could get that money under this lawsuit, if she did frame Miss Mars, that's absolutely relevant to today's case, and I don't see how any of that is argumentative to just ask about her knowledge.
Your Honor, if I may briefly.
Can I hear the question again?
Our question was, you knew about that statute you knew that if you could convince a court that Miss Mars killed your grandmother, you would get everything.
Mr. Miller?
Yes, I'm objecting specifically to the part where opposing counsel is stating if you could convince a court that Drew Mars killed him. It's, as phrased, is argumentative to this witness.
That objection's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. So you knew that if you could convince a court that Miss Mars killed your grandmother, then you would get everything.
Not if I could convince them. If that's what happened, then yes.
Miss Mars, you knew about that statute statute back when you learned that Miss Mars was the inheritor of that will.
Oh, I learned about that statute years before that.
So you learned about that statute before you even got to your grandmother's door that summer.
Yes.
Miss Mars, you filed this lawsuit under that same statute the day your grandmother's will was read.
That's correct.
Miss Mars, you didn't just know about that statute, You also knew about your grandmother's fatal allergy to chlorangium.
Yes, I did. Like I told you earlier, I learned about it 2 weeks before she died.
You knew that if your grandmother took any chlorangium, she could die.
Yes,
And you know that ultimately, that's exactly how she did die.
I do.
Miss Rogers, you learned about your grandmother's fatal allergy to that medicine just 2 weeks before August 15th, right?
That's right. Drew brought it up to me 2 weeks before she died from it.
And then your grandmother was poisoned with that same medicine on August 15th, just 2 weeks later.
That's right.
Thank you, Miss Rogers. I have no further questions.
Anything on redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready.
Ms. Rogers, opposing counsel just asked you a lot of questions about why you moved back in with Agatha Lee, and I just want to be clear here. Did you move in with your grandmother because you were running out of money?
No, and I wasn't even really running out of money. I mean, my trust fund was low, but I had fancy cars, Rolexes. If I needed cash, I knew where to get it. I also knew my Nana. She wasn't going to give me any more money. She basically told me that she didn't want anything to do with me in that letter. I went to see her because I missed her.
Well, did you ever ask your grandmother to put you back into her will?
No. She told me her mind was made up, and I know Nana. She's a tough gong. I never asked her.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. No further questions, and barring no recross, may this witness step down.
Anything on recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
Very good. Yes. Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Does the plaintiff wish to offer any additional evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff calls Mike Bond to the stand.
Mr. Bond. You can proceed whenever you're ready.
Mr. Bond, could you introduce yourself to the court?
Of course. The name's Bond, Mike Bond.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Bond?
I'm a private investigator, actually, a renowned consultant detective, but I won't recite my resume for you. As my grandmother used to say, when your work speaks for itself, don't interrupt.
How are you involved in this case?
Well, I was actually hired by Miss Rogers, once to find Miss Lee, and the second time to investigate what happened with Miss Lee's death.
Let's talk about your methods. As a private investigator, what are your methods of investigation?
Well, I treat every case like a donut. It's got a big old hole in the center, and I gotta find that donut's hole to the donut's hole. I act as an observer of truth, follow the facts down that path, and the truth falls at my feet.
Mr. Bond, what concrete steps do you take for investigations?
Well, of course, the first steps of an investigation are no secret. You obviously want to talk to anybody of interest. You want to thoroughly search that crime scene, and you want to collect forensic evidence.
Let's talk through your steps of investigation. Who did you speak with?
Well, obviously, I interviewed Miss Rogers when I was hired, but I also spoke with Drew Mars, Miss Lee's caretaker.
What did you learn from Miss Mars?
Well, I asked Miss Mars about the state of Miss Agatha Lee's health in the days leading up to her death. Miss Lee took some medications for arthritis and back spasms, but that's also when Miss Mars told me of Miss Lee's fatal chlorangium allergy.
Let's talk about chlorangium. Do you know what that is?
Why, yes, ma'am, I do. As any self-respecting private investigator would, I did some research, and I discovered that chlorangium is an over-the-counter drug for heartburn.
So based on your research, what does chlorangium look like?
Well, it's essentially identical to Miss Lee's arthritis pills. Small, purple, no taste or smell.
Do you know who typically provided Miss Lee with her medications?
Yes, ma'am, I do. Miss Mars told me herself that as the caretaker, that was her responsibility.
Did you ever find a pill organizer inside Lee Manor?
Yes, ma'am, it was right next to the bed where Miss Lee was unfortunately found.
Moving on past that first interview, did you ever see the defendant again?
Yes, ma'am, I did. About a week later, I returned to the home for the reading of the will. Miss Lee's attorney, Kirby Doolittle, did the reading.
And what did that will say?
Well, it said that Miss Lee had left everything to Drew Mars.
How did the defendant appear to react?
You know, now that you mention it, Miss Mars acted rather surprised. She kept saying, I had no idea, I can't believe it. But you see, ma'am, I'd already discovered that that wasn't true.
How did you discover that?
Well, you see, on August 15th, when I was at Lee Manor, I searched the defendant's room. And that's when I found the computer that the defendant had. And on that computer, I found an email about the will.
Mr. Miller, could you display Exhibit 13? Mr. Bond, is this that email you found on the defendant's computer?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And does it appear to be a fair and accurate picture of that email?
Yes, ma'am.
And before we get into what that email says, could you just tell us who appears to have written it?
Why, ma'am, it says right there in big bold letters at the top that it was sent by Drew Mars.
Plaintiff offers Exhibit 13.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well. Exhibit 13 is in evidence on consent.
Mr. Bond, what does the beginning of that email say?
Well, Miss Mars wrote that Agatha just told me she changed her will to leave everything to me.
And what's the date on that email?
February 1st, 2018. That's a good 6 months before the reading of the will.
You mentioned a third part of your investigation, finding forensic evidence. Did you find anything like that for this investigation?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
What did you find?
Well, first were the forensic reports of Miss Lee herself, specifically the talk screen and the autopsy.
Mr. Miller, could you show us what's been pre-admitted as Exhibit 2? So, Mr. Bond, what does this autopsy say?
Well, ma'am, the medical examiner made a determination for the cause of death, and it found that Miss Lee died as a result of ingesting 2 chlorantramine pills.
Did you find any medication inside Lee Manor?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you find it?
Well, we found a black bag with a bottle of pills inside Drew Mars's closet.
Mr. Miller, could you display what's been pre-marked as Exhibits 14, 15, and 17? Mr. Bond, could you just tell the court what these images are?
Well, sure. Starting from left to right, that first picture you see is the bag we found in Drew Mars's closet. That second picture you see, the bottle of pills, well, that was inside that black bag. And of course, the last picture on the right, that's Drew Mars's closet where both items were found.
Plaintiff offers Exhibits 14, 15, and 17.
Any objection?
Without objection, Your Honor.
14, 15, and 17 are in evidence on consent.
Mr. Bond, let's talk about that closet and that bag, Exhibits 14 and 15. Now, where was that bag found?
Right there in Drew Mars's closet, you can see it's right under that gray sweater looking thing.
Well, you said that a bottle of pills was found inside that bag. Mr. Miller, could you pull up Exhibit 17 again? Did you ever find out what these pills were?
Yes, ma'am. The toxicology report confirmed that those pills were chlorantramine.
Do you know if any forensic testing was ever done on that black bag?
Yes, ma'am. They did a search for fingerprints.
And did they find any fingerprints to your knowledge?
And they found a partial fingerprint on the zipper of that black bag belonging to Drew Mars.
Mr. Bond, let's go over your investigation as a whole. Mr. Millard, if you could pull up our chart. Based on what you learned, did the defendant have access to Miss Lee's medication?
Yes, ma'am.
Did the defendant appear to have knowledge of Miss Lee's allergy?
Yes, ma'am.
And lastly, did you find fingerprints of the defendant inside that home?
Yes, ma'am. That was the donut's hole to the donut's hole.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Bond. No further questions at this time.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
Mr. Bond, I want to start off first by talking about why you're here today. Is that all right?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Bond, Stevie Rogers actually hired you twice to work for her. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
The first time, she gave you $10,000 to locate her grandmother, right?
Yes, sir.
And the second time, she contacted you about conducting an investigation of her grandmother's death. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Bond, she said she was going to give you $25,000 for your work on the case. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir. As a private investigator, I do get paid.
Right. But Mr. Bond, you haven't received that money yet, have you?
No, sir, not yet.
You're going to get that money after this case is over, right?
Well, sir, I'm not entirely sure. I do expect payment, though.
Now I want to talk a little bit about Miss Rogers. Now let's rewind. Miss Rogers actually called you on August 15th, isn't that right?
Yes, sir, she did.
She told you that her grandmother had been murdered, right?
Yes, sir.
She specifically used the word murdered, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Bond, I want to be clear for the members of the jury. The police had not arrived when she called you, had they?
To the best of my knowledge, no, sir.
That autopsy you talked about on the direct examination, that hadn't been done yet, had it?
Correct.
So, Mr. Bond, are you telling the members of the jury that Miss Rogers was calling this a murder before the police had even gotten there?
Objection, Your Honor. Cumulative, if I may be heard.
I'm sorry, let me hear the question again.
So, Mr. Bond, you're telling the members of the jury that Mrs. Rogers was calling it a murder before the police even got there?
And the objection is that it's cumulative?
Yes, Your Honor, if I may explain.
Sure.
Mr. Beard has previously asked, this was before the police arrived. He's previously asked, she used the word murder at that time. At this point, he's combining his questions and tying them together with a bow, Your Honor. That's cumulative.
Well, I think we can give him one bow. How's that? So
Fine with
I'll
that, Your
throw
Honor.
the objection, but we get the point.
I'll re-ask you the question, Mr. Bond. Mr. Bond, so she was calling it a murder before the police got there, isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
And then, like you mentioned on direct, you sat down and you had a conversation with Miss Rogers, isn't that right?
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about that conversation. Is that okay with you?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Bond, when you talked to Miss Rogers, she was convinced that Drew Mars was responsible for Agatha Lee's death. Isn't that right?
Well, she did seem to come off as that's what she believed to have happened, yes.
Right. And Mr. Bond, she told you about a conversation that she had with Agatha Lee, right?
Are you talking about the one on the 14th?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Bond, I want to make something extremely clear. When you conducted your investigation, did you find anybody that can confirm that conversation happened?
No, sir. To my knowledge, it was just Miss Rogers and Miss Lee.
Well, Mr. Bond, you also reviewed Detective Kahn's report too, right?
Yes.
Did he find anybody that could confirm that conversation happened?
Well, other than what's in the report, no.
And then you came back a little later for the will hearing, isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bond, after the will hearing happened, Mrs. Rogers was persistent about a toxicology report, right?
Well, I do believe, yes, if I remember correctly, yes.
Now, I want to talk about the forensic evidence you talked about on direct examination. Is that okay with you?
Of course.
Now, Mr. Bond, I want to start off with making something very clear. When you said we collected forensic evidence, you were talking about Detective Khan, right?
Well, yes, I was in the room when it was happening, though.
Right, but Mr. Bond, you couldn't collect forensic evidence because you didn't have any gloves on, right?
Well, it was more for the fact that I'm not licensed law enforcement. I'm a private investigator.
Right, but also because you didn't have gloves on as well, right?
Right, I'm not trained to do that. I left that to the professional.
You sat down with Miss Mars and interviewed her as well, right?
Yes, sir.
You asked Miss Mars if you could investigate a room.
Yes.
Miss Mars said no. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Miss Howard, could you pull up Exhibit 5? Now, Mr. Bond, after Miss Mars told you no, her and Detective Khan, they actually went to go talk in Agatha Lee's room, right?
Yes.
But Mr. Bond, you weren't finished with Miss Rogers. I mean, with Miss Mars, were you?
What do you mean?
Well, you believe that she was hiding something, right?
Oh, yes, sir, yes.
So you searched the room, right?
Correct.
And you had no permission?
Right.
And you had no gloves, right?
Right.
Now, on direct examination, you told us that you investigated a room and you found the computer, right?
That's correct.
Now, Mr. Mars, you also mentioned on your direct that in Mrs. Mars's room, that's where they found the chlorantramine bottle, right?
Yes, in the closet.
Now, Mr. Bond, when you were in that room doing that investigation, to your knowledge, did anyone come in?
Well, no, sir. I was in the room. I would know.
Right. You were by yourself. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Mr. Bond, so nobody saw when you tried to log into a computer because you're in the room by yourself, right?
Yes, sir.
Nobody would have seen if you planted that chlorantramine bottle in the bag. Isn't that right?
Well, sir, I entirely disagree with the question, the premise of it, and I find it just a little bit offensive. I would never plant evidence. Like I said on my direct examination, I follow the facts where they lead. I did not see that pill bottle or that black bag that day. I didn't look in the closet for whatever reason. I refuse the implication that I would ever plant evidence.
But Mr. Bond, redirecting back to my question, nobody would have seen if you planted that chlorantramine bottle in that bag. Isn't that right?
Mr. Beard, I can't answer that question because that's not even a possibility, sir. I did not, I do not, I never do plant evidence.
Well, Mr. Bond, nobody would have seen if you wiped the room down of all your fingerprints, right?
Again, I don't tamper with scenes, so I can't answer that question.
Now I want to talk about that. You mentioned that you don't tamper with scenes, right?
Of course.
Well, you're aware of the fingerprint analysis report, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Bond, you just told us that you searched Drew Mars's room with no gloves, right?
Right.
You told us that you picked up her computer, right?
Right.
You told us that you tried to log in, right?
Correct.
Mr. Bond, your fingerprints weren't found anywhere in the fingerprint analysis. Isn't that right?
Well, I want to make something clear here. That analysis was of that bag and that pill bottle.
Redirecting back to my question, they did a whole analysis of the room, right? Like you mentioned on your direct examination, to see if there were any fingerprints or evidence that could help them with the investigation. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And during that whole sweep, where they were looking for fingerprints, they didn't find your fingerprints once, did they?
Because they didn't do the analysis on anything other than that bag with that zipper and that pill bottle. I didn't touch those. I didn't know they existed before August 21st.
Well, Mr. Bond, I want to ask you a question. The fingerprint analysis report actually stated that it looked like someone had tried to wipe fingerprints off the bag, didn't it?
There were unusable fingerprints. Yes, sir.
Right. There were unusable fingerprints in a room that you were alone in. Isn't that right?
Yes, and again, I highly take offense to your implication here, sir.
At this time, the defense has no further questions.
Thank you. Anything on redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready.
Mr. Bond, Mr. Beard just asked you about conducting a search of the defendant's room without gloves. I want to make something very clear myself. Did you go inside the defendant's closet without wearing gloves?
Ma'am, of course not. I did not think to look inside of the defendant's closet on August 15th. I was looking to see what was there. I'm very well aware of what I touched when I touched. The analysis here today was focused on that bag and those pills in that closet.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. We have no further questions, and barring recross, we ask you be excused.
Anything on recross, Mr. Beard?
No recross necessary, Your Honor.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bond. Any further evidence from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor, we rest our case.
Very good. We will take a brief recess. I've been asked to remind you that the video is being publicly broadcast, so you can mind what you say during the next 5 minutes, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks very much.
I'm about to hit 5 minutes on my timer. Judges, to confirm you're back, if you could either flash to live video real quick or type in the chat, that would be great. That's the standard process. Right. All right. I think I see that everybody's back, so I will bring back the students. Student attorneys, please let Judge Vines know when you're ready to proceed with the defense case in chief.
We're ready to proceed whenever, Your Honor.
All right, everybody here needs to be here, I guess. Does the defendant wish to present any evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Drew Mars to the stand.
Ms. Mars, you can inquire whenever you're ready.
Please introduce yourself to us.
Good afternoon. My name is Drew Mars.
What do you do for a living, Miss Mars?
Well, I'm a live-in caretaker, which is basically a nurse, but instead of treating people at the hospital, I treat them at their house. So I live with them and give them constant access to care.
Let's talk about why you're here today. Did you know Agatha Lee?
Yeah, I knew her for about 10 years before she died.
What was your relationship with Miss Lee like?
She was a huge part of my life. We were a huge part of each other's lives. She wasn't just my patient, she was my family.
Did Miss Lee have any other family?
No, not really. Her daughter died in 2008, and since then her granddaughter, Stevie Rogers, stopped talking to her.
Objection, Your Honor, to lack of foundation as to the latter portion that Stevie Rogers stopped talking to her completely.
On what basis?
Yes, Your Honor. We haven't heard how this witness had knowledge as to the communications between Miss Lee and Mr. Rogers. We heard in the direct of Stevie Rogers that there was very limited communication. So we're going to need to hear this foundation so the members of the jury can apply the proper weight.
Ms. Howard?
Yes, Your Honor. I can lay that foundation with the witness.
Very good.
Ms. Mars, how do you know that Miss Lee and her granddaughter stopped talking?
Well, this hurt Miss Agatha a lot. She would talk to me about it all the time, how her granddaughter wasn't talking to her and how they were so close previously. And then suddenly after 2008, Stevie stopped talking to her completely.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay to the statement Stevie wasn't talking to me from Miss Lee.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, we're not using this for the truth of the matter asserted. We're only using it for the effect on Miss Lee. We're about to go into a will that Miss Lee wrote Miss Rogers out of, and that will was written. We've already heard a letter from Miss Lee saying that Miss Rogers stopped talking to her entirely. So we're not offering this for truth. It's already been elicited.
Response, Your Honor.
Sure.
Miss Lee's statement cannot have an effect on Miss Lee. Counsel is using this statement of Agatha Lee at this time to prove the truth of the matter, that Stevie had stopped talking to her grandmother in its entirety.
Your Honor, may I be heard on that?
Briefly.
Your Honor, like I said, we're not using this for truth. It's already come in that Miss Lee thought that Miss Rogers stopped talking to her.
Yeah, I'm not sure the fact that it's already been, that similar testimony has been admitted makes this testimony admissible. So I will sustain the objection and I'll grant the implicit motion to strike.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss Mars, would you recognize a will made by Agatha Lee if I showed it to you today?
I would.
What is that document on the screen right now?
I apologize, the Zoom zoomed out. That's the will from 2018 that Miss Lee wrote.
Now, in that will, were any changes made to that will since the previous one?
Yes. So I was actually shocked. This was in 2008 where I was a sole inheritor and where Stevie Rogers was a sole inheritor. And then in 2018, Miss Lee changed her will to make Drew Mars, me, the sole inheritor of her estate.
Now, we've heard that after Miss Lee's death, you said that you didn't know that you were the sole inheritor of that estate. Why did you say that?
Well, I didn't want to give anyone a reason to think that I would do something or cause Miss Lee's death. Agatha was family to me. I would never do something like that. And I didn't want to give anyone a reason to think that I would.
Let's go back to before Miss Lee's death. What happened after Miss Rogers was written out of that will?
Well, after Miss Rogers was written out of that will, Miss Rogers showed up at Lee Manor at Agatha's house, just totally out of the blue after about a decade. And Agatha let her stay, but didn't necessarily embrace her with open arms.
How was Miss Rogers acting while she was staying at that house?
She was just very interested in Agatha. Stevie was trying to be there anytime Agatha did anything, just be right by her side. It felt like I was in the way of something.
You said it felt like you were in the way. How was your relationship with Miss Rogers?
I was there to take care of Agatha. I was very worried about her, so I was skeptical of Stevie. She showed up and said that her life was turned around, so I just tried to keep an eye out and make sure that Agatha was okay.
Did you ever see Miss Lee's relationship with Miss Rogers change?
Yeah, on August 14th, 2018, the day before Miss Agatha was found dead, I heard a conversation between Stevie Rogers and Agatha.
What day was that?
August 14th of 2018.
Is that the same conversation that Miss Rogers just testified about?
It is, but it isn't the way that Stevie just said it happened.
What actually happened in that conversation?
Well, Stevie was talking to Agatha and telling her how she was devoted to Agatha and how she'd turned her life around and asked to be put back in the will.
How did Miss Lee respond?
Agatha said that she loved her, but wasn't going to give her a single penny. Not now, not ever.
What happened after that?
They both walked out of the study, and as soon as Agatha left to get ready for lunch, Stevie just looked at me and glared.
Did she say anything to you?
Yeah. She said, "Don't count your millions yet."
Did you know what that meant?
I mean, I knew that she wanted to be put back in the will, but I didn't know. I didn't know that this would happen.
You didn't know that what would happen?
That Agatha would be killed.
Miss Mars, when did you find out that Miss Lee was dead?
The next morning, on August 15th, I went into Agatha's room to wake her up with some coffee like I did every morning for the past 10 years. But then I found her, not breathing.
What did you do when you found her?
I felt like I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even look at her. I had to run and go tell Stevie.
How did Miss Rogers react when you told her that her grandmother was dead?
She didn't react. She just took out her phone and made 2 phone calls, one to the police and one to her private investigator named M. Bond, who just showed up at the house even before the police did.
What did Mr. Bond do when he got there?
He kept asking me to search my room. I didn't know who he was, and I even asked for a badge, and he couldn't provide me with any. So I told him no.
Mr. Beard, could you put up exhibit? Thank you, Mr. Beard. Now, we've heard about this bottle of chlorangemine that was found in your room after Miss Lee was murdered. Do you know anything about that? Is it yours?
I mean, I heard that it was found in my room, but no, I don't know what I know that's chlorandamine. I don't know how it got to my room. I've never seen that before.
Ms. Mars, did anyone else have access to your room the week after Miss Lee died?
I mean, I just heard that M. Bond went into my room the morning that Agatha was found dead.
So we've heard that Mr. Bond was in your room that morning. What was Miss Rogers doing?
She was just following the police around and kept trying to tell them that I killed Agatha and insisting on a toxicology screen.
You just said that Miss Rogers was insisting on a toxicology screen. Before that point, had you heard anyone else mention drugs being involved in this?
No, I had no idea. I just found her laying in bed.
Did you and the police ever find out if drugs were involved in Miss Lee's death?
Yeah, when the toxicology screen came back, it was found that Miss Agatha had died from allergic reaction to chlorandamine, which I knew she was definitely allergic to.
Did anyone else know about Miss Lee's fatal allergy to chlorandamine?
Yeah, Stevie did. She found out the week before.
Miss Mars, who can buy chlorandamine?
Anyone. You can walk into any pharmacy. It's an over-the-counter medicine.
Other than you and Miss Lee, who was in the house the night of August 14th, 2018?
Just Stevie Rogers.
Thank you, Miss Mars. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Cross,
Yes, Your Honor.
whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Ms. Mars. My name is Julia Grieve, and I'll be asking you a few questions.
Yeah.
I'd like to start by talking about Miss Lee's will. Now,
Okay.
she told you that she was putting you in the will back in February of 2018, right?
I did.
You knew Miss Lee was leaving you her house?
Yeah, I heard that I was I was told I was a sole beneficiary to her entire estate. Yeah.
So as the sole beneficiary, you get the royalties from her book, right?
I assume so.
As well as what you assumed would be millions of dollars in cash.
I mean, I knew that Agatha had money, but I didn't know how much.
Now, in your own words, your family needed money, didn't they?
Well, I grew up not being so wealthy, so my family was had some hardships, yes.
Bringing you back to my question, in your own words, your family needed that money.
They did.
You thought Agatha's money meant your family would never worry about money ever again.
I mean, her money would help us because we didn't have that much money and my sibling was sick. And my sibling did need the money for her treatment that she needed, and that treatment cost money.
I'm just going to need a clear yes or no to my question. You thought Agatha's money meant your family would never worry about money ever again.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about what you've heard today.
Okay.
You've been here throughout this trial, haven't you?
Yes,
You heard when Stevie Rogers took the stand.
I did.
You heard Ms. Rogers say she had a conversation with her grandma about that will on August 14th.
I did.
According to Stevie, Agatha wanted to put Stevie in the will and take you out.
I mean, that's what Stevie said, but that's not what actually happened.
So it's your claim that Ms. Rogers lied about that conversation.
I don't know if she lied. But what I heard outside of the door between when that conversation happened was not what Stevie said.
Let's talk about what you did after you heard that conversation. You got in the car, right?
I did, yes.
Drove Miss Lee out to lunch,
Yeah, I did that often.
and then you went to the pharmacy.
I did.
You went to the pharmacy sometime between 11:30 and 1:30 p.m. that day. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Mr. Millard, if you could pull up that timeline. Let the record reflect we're adding that the defendant went to the pharmacy at some point between 12 p.m. and 1:30 p.m.
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
has this been altered since the last time we saw it?
No, Your Honor. This is all the testimony that's accumulated through Ms. Rogers' direct and M. Bond's direct.
Was that red box there previously, though?
Yes, Your Honor. That came up at the end of Ms. Rogers' direct when she read the autopsy report, which stated her grandmother died between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Ms. Mars, when you walked into that pharmacy, you knew Miss Lee was allergic to chlorandramine.
Yeah, I found that the day I was hired.
And when you walked into that pharmacy, you knew chlorandramine looks identical to Miss Lee's arthritis medication.
I did. I am going to be a nurse, so I was studying pills and how they look.
And as a soon-to-be nurse, you knew that you could buy chlorandramine over the counter, like you said, at any pharmacy.
You can buy it anywhere, but I didn't buy it.
Now, you can't tell us what you bought at the pharmacy that day.
It was 2 years ago. I mean, I'm a nurse. I'm a caretaker. I go to the pharmacy all the time. I'm there about 4 times a week. So no, I can't tell you what I bought at that trip at the pharmacy, but I can tell you I didn't buy chlorandramine.
You don't have a receipt for what you bought, do you?
I don't.
You can't tell us that you bought not chlorandramine or anything else. You don't remember.
I don't remember specifically what I bought, no.
Let's talk about what you do remember. You were here when Mr. Bond testified, weren't you?
I was.
You heard Mr. Bond say the police found a black bag inside your closet.
They did. That's what Mr. Bond said, and it was found, but I don't know how I got there. I didn't even see it before. Agatha used to, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Agatha used to put things in my closet, and she would store them there.
Let's talk about what was on that black bag. You heard Mr. Bond say your fingerprint was on that bag.
I mean, it's my closet, so I may have accidentally touched it while going through my things, but I had never seen that black bag before.
Well, actually, Ms. Mars, the attorneys asked you about that black bag.
They did.
They asked you if you had ever touched it before.
Yes.
You said never.
I mean, no, I didn't know if I touched it or not. I may have accidentally touched it not knowing, but no.
Ms. Mars, you didn't say I might have accidentally touched it. You said never.
I did.
Let's talk about what happened after Miss Lee died. You were there for the reading of her will, weren't you?
I was.
You heard the attorney said Miss Lee had left everything to you.
Yeah.
In response, after you heard that, you said, I had no idea.
I did.
You said that over and over again, didn't you?
Yes.
That was a lie, wasn't it?
Well, they were gonna. I thought I was gonna be a suspect. I could never do something like that. Agatha was family to me. I couldn't give anyone a reason to think that I would kill her.
Ms. Mars, bringing it back to my question, that was a lie, wasn't it?
Yes.
You actually knew about that will for months.
Yes, I knew when she showed me in February of 2018.
Mr. Miller, could you pull up Exhibit 13? This has already been admitted into evidence. Ms. Mars, on this email, you said, Agatha's leaving me everything.
I did.
Said, we're talking millions.
Yes.
You said, this is totally going to change my life.
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. Anything on redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
You're ready, please.
Miss Mars, you were just asked a lot about what you said about not knowing about that will. I want to ask you, how was Stevie Rogers acting in the week leading up to when that will was read?
Objection, Your Honor, outside the scope of cross-examination.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Sure.
Your Honor, the witness just testified on cross-examination that the reason that she lied about not knowing about that will was because Stevie Rogers was adamant that she was the one who murdered Miss Lee, and because she believed that Stevie Rogers was framing her for that murder. And so she didn't want to give her any other reason to put a pin on her, to focus on her for that framing.
Response, Your Honor.
Sure.
That's not what the witness said. She said I told that lie because she didn't want to give anyone a reason to think she could have killed. She didn't say anything about Miss Rogers. And even if she did, the actions of Miss Rogers weeks before that event is outside the scope of cross-examination.
Your Honor, may I be heard on that?
That's not necessary. I'll overrule the objection for the moment.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Miss Mars, how was Miss Rogers acting toward you the week after Miss Lee's death?
She just kept glaring at me and like was trying to be distant. And she also just kept calling the police to ask when they were doing an autopsy, when they were doing a toxicology screen. I didn't know what was going on.
Did she ever accuse you personally of murdering Agatha Lee?
Yeah, she kept telling the police that I did it, and she was telling me that I did it.
Miss Mars, we've heard a lot about a sick sibling today. What was your relationship with Agatha Lee like?
Like I said earlier, Agatha was family to me. She wasn't just my patient. I didn't just take care of her. I lived with her for over 10 years. She was family. I spent more time with her than I did with my own family over those past 10 years. We spent every day together, eating dinner, playing backgammon, watching movies.
Would you ever have killed Miss Lee for her money?
No, never.
Thank you, Miss Mars. I have no further questions.
Anything on recross?
No, Your Honor.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Mars.
Thank you.
Does the defendant wish to introduce any other evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Rhyan Cabrera to the stand.
Very good, Mr. Cabrera. You may inquire whenever you're ready, sir.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury, Mr. Cabrera?
I think you're muted, Mr.
Mr.
Cabrera.
Cabrera, you're muted. It's going to be on the bottom left-hand corner. Unmute.
Oh, okay. I don't really know how this Zoom room situation works too well. Sorry about that.
That's all right, Mr. Cabrera. We're all learning. All right, could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yes, my name is Rhyan Cabrera. How you doing today?
Mr. Cabrera, could you tell us what you do for a living?
Well, yes, I'm an author. I've been writing books probably longer than you've been going to libraries or they've been around. But I also specialize in biographies. I spend a lot of time writing.
Now, how are you involved in today's case?
Well, I know Agatha Lee, the great mystery author. She's quite the cracker. We've had our time together. We spent time as friends, asking questions, and I really got to know Agatha. I actually saw her the day before she passed.
I want to talk a little bit more about your relationship. How did you and Miss Lee meet?
Well, it's kind of difficult to, for someone like me, myself, to get out there. But I did, got in contact with my grandson and helped me set up one of them, the Twitter profile, the direct message. I sent Agatha Lee a message on the Twitter and she responded. It took her about 3 years.
What happened after she responded?
Well, I went and moved to Midlands and we were able to start working together. And it was really quite the time.
Now, you mentioned you moved to Midlands. Can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship with Agatha Lee?
Well, yes, me and Agatha, we were able to become quite the close friends very quickly. Our conversations, more from the, hello, Agatha, how you doing today, to, oh, Agatha, please, you can't say that. He's old enough to be your grandson now. So be careful, Miss Agatha. But, we spent a lot of time together. I got to learn about her personal life and family and such things like.
And now, Mr. Lee, when you were working with Agatha Lee in her house, did anybody else live with her there?
Well, yes, she had a caretaker, Miss Drew Mars.
Who is Drew Mars?
Well, Drew Mars she'd been around for over 10 years, according to Agatha. So she was Agatha's caretaker. She drove her around and fed her and prepared her meals. She eventually ended up being my caretaker as well. She would help me out a lot as well. So I thank Miss Drew for that.
And can you tell us a little bit about the insight between Miss Lee's relationship with Drew Mars?
Well, it seems like they've been spending a lot of time together. She lived in the house, and they seemed really close. Almost like family in some sort of ways. I actually knew that Agatha showed me she had wrote Miss Mars into her will at one point.
Mr. Cabrera, would you recognize that will if I showed you today in court?
Yes, most definitely. It's a little hard for me to see, but I might be able to see it all right if we just zoom it up real quick.
Okay, we'll give it a shot.
All right. Okay.
Can you see that okay, Mr. Cabrera?
I think so. I do see. Yes, I do see. This looks like the will she showed me.
And now, Mr. Cabrera, does this look like a true and accurate copy?
Yes, it does indeed. I think so. Yes.
And does it look like it's been changed or altered in any way?
Well, I believe so.
Now, can you tell us who was the sole beneficiary in this will?
I'm sorry, the witness just testified that it has been altered?
Mr. Cabrera?
Yes.
I asked you, has this will been altered in any way?
Oh, no. No, it looks just fine, sir.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cabrera. I'll speak up next time so you can hear me.
All right.
Now, who was the sole beneficiary in this will?
Well, like Agatha told me and showed me that she was actually giving her will entirely to Miss Drew Mars, and that it was no longer going to Miss Stevie Rogers.
Now, let's transition. Who is Stevie Rogers?
Well, I didn't really talk to Agatha much about Stevie, but Stevie was apparently her granddaughter. I'd never met Stevie or seen Stevie, but every time Agatha talked about her, it wasn't the most pleasant.
Now, when you were working on Agatha Lee's biography, did you ever see Stevie Rogers there?
No, not necessarily. It wasn't until late in July that she just popped up one day when I was supposed to pick up Agatha to go down to play some bingo. So I really hadn't seen her or met her until the one day she popped up in July.
And did you ever get a chance to interact with Stevie Rogers?
Not much, no.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, I want to talk about the days leading up to Agatha's death. Is that okay with you?
Yes, indeed.
Mr. Cabrera, when was the last time you saw your friend Agatha Lee?
Well, I saw her the day before she passed. It was in August. I believe it was the August 14th. And that's when we hung out. We went to lunch together.
How did the day go?
Well, Agatha was a little, out of the ordinary. Normally me and Agatha get into the car, we start laughing and having a good time, hooting and hollering, but Agatha didn't seem in the mood today.
Why didn't you think she was in the mood?
Well, I was making jokes and she wasn't laughing much. So I decided to ask Agatha if anything was wrong with her. She didn't seem like a normal self.
Did she say anything when you asked her?
Well, she didn't say much, but she said she had to say no to Stevie Rogers about something, and that she hoped Stevie forgave her and knew she loved her.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
I just hear the answer again. I'm sorry.
Mr. Cabrera, could you repeat your answer for the judge, please?
Oh, yes. That she... Can you repeat the question, sir? I'm so, my memory's going.
It's all right, Mr. Cabrera. I said, what did she say to you?
Oh, well, she said, and I asked her what was wrong with her, and she said, she had to tell Stevie no about something, and she hoped Stevie forgave her. Something like that.
Hearsay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Beard?
Your Honor, I had to say no, and that I hope Stevie forgave me has no truth value asserted in it. We as the defense, certainly it is inconsequential to us, or whether what she had to tell them, or if she hoped that Stevie actually forgave her. We're eliciting this testimony to show the subsequent action then of Mr. Rogers. So the statements in themselves have no inherent truth value asserted to them, and because we're using them to show subsequent action.
May I respond?
You may.
These statements, specifically the one, "I hope that Stevie will forgive me," does contain some truth value. But even if opposing counsel is using it not for the truth of the matter, they can't lay the foundation necessary to show the subsequent action of Stevie Rogers through this witness. And thus, it cannot be used for those purposes and is still hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond on those grounds?
Sure.
Your Honor, it's the defense's contention that after Stevie Rogers had that conversation with Agatha Lee, she started to develop a plan on how she could get that money from the will. And now this statement goes to show the subsequent action after Stevie Rogers had that conversation. And Your Honor, again, furthermore, it is also a point of contention in today's case, the content of that conversation, and if Stevie Rogers even did take subsequent action. So this is laying the foundation that once that statement that Agatha Lee said, then subsequently calls Stevie Rogers to do things.
I'll overrule the objection.
Mr. Lee, could you repeat again, what did she say to you?
Well, like I said she had to tell Stevie no about something. It sounded serious. She said that she hoped Stevie forgave her and that everything would be okay. That was, and then she didn't want to really talk about it anymore.
Mr. Cabrera, was this the last time you ever saw Agatha Lee?
You know, I didn't know that it was going to be our last time, but we did spend some time together that day, and we had a good rest of our day together, and off she went back home, and I never saw Agatha again. That's a dear friend of mine, so I am a little hurt about that.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Cabrera. At this time, Your Honor, the defense has no further questions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor.
How you doing there, sir?
Good afternoon, Mr. Cabrera. My name's Alex Millard, and I'm going to be asking you a few questions on behalf of the plaintiff today. Is that all right?
Hey, you go right ahead, sir.
All right. Now you mentioned this on direct, but you were Agatha Lee's biographer, correct?
Yes, we had spent a lot of time together and got to know each other pretty well.
That's right. You would visit her one day a week, every week for about 6 months.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and let's talk about one day in particular, May 2018. You remember one instance where Drew Mars, the defendant, came into the room while you were speaking with Miss Lee, correct?
Well, yes, I believe so.
She came in carrying a pill and a glass of water.
Yes, she actually brings me my pills sometimes too, you know. But that it's more vitamin C, nothing serious, sir.
Right, but on May of 2018 specifically, that's a yes. The defendant brought in a pill and a glass of water for Miss Lee.
Yes, I do remember something like that. That's not out of the ordinary. She is her caretaker and all.
Well, on this day, the defendant, she was about to explain what that pill was, right?
I don't really, yeah, I think so, something like that.
Well, you do remember for sure that before the defendant could say what that pill was, Agatha Lee stopped her.
Yeah, she did. I remember it. I do remember this.
Ms. Lee said, skip the recitation. You know I'll take whatever you give.
Your Honor, substantially more prejudicial than probative. May I be heard?
Sure.
Your Honor, I have a good faith belief that opposing counsel is trying to correlate Miss Lee's regular everyday pills to chlorangiamine. I believe that opposing counsel is going to use this statement that Agatha Lee said about the daily vitamins she took and try to draw a correlation and to make it seem that Miss Mars could have given her chlorangiamine and Miss Lee would have taken it. Its probative value is substantially outweighed by its prejudicial effect.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Agatha Lee told the defendant that she would take any medicine that she was given by the defendant. The probative value of this testimony is that it shows the defendant believed that she could give any pill to Agatha Lee without her questioning it. That goes directly to her being able to switch out her arthritis medication with that chlorandramine, which caused her death.
Your Honor, may I respond on those grounds?
Certainly.
Your Honor, the medicine she was specifically referring to when Miss Lee said that when Miss Mars had the pills in her hands, was Mrs. Lee's everyday medication. For opposing counsel to try to draw a correlation between something that Miss Lee did every day to a drug that Miss Mars knew would cause a fatal reaction to her is substantially more prejudicial than the probative effect that opposing counsel is saying that it has.
Not anything that suggests unfair prejudice. So obviously that's something you can take up in summation. I'll overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Cabrera, just to be clear,
Yes.
Agatha Lee told the defendant, you know, I'll take anything that you give me, right?
Yeah, it was a little, a joke or something like that. Yes.
I'm not asking whether you think it's a joke or not. It's just yes,
Okay.
it's what she told the defendant.
Oh, yes, I said yes. Sorry, sir.
And now I want to talk a little bit more about Agatha Lee.
Okay.
You believe she's one of the best writers in American history, right?
Well, it's not just me, but yes, I do believe that.
And she managed to get that title after writing only one book?
Well, I couldn't do it. She could. It was impressive. I will say so myself.
Right. And you thought, a writer this good, why didn't she write more books, right?
Well, yes, I think that was definitely a fair question to have. I would want to write more books if I was Agatha.
And you asked Agatha that question, didn't you?
Well, she told me not to. She said, don't ask me why I haven't written any more books. That was the first thing Miss Agatha told me, and so I tried to respect that.
Mr. Cabrera, that might have been what she said when you first met her.
Yes.
But in August of 2018, you did ask her why she didn't write more books.
Actually, it was on the last time I saw Miss Agatha, and she told me I could ask why didn't she write any more books. So I did. Yes, indeed, I did.
And she responded by saying she had written multiple books. Is that a yes?
Yes, she said that. Why would you assume such a thing? I write and I have other novels that I've written. I was completely surprised to hear that she hadn't published something like that.
Right, but she did tell you she kept all of those manuscripts for those unpublished books, didn't she?
Yes, she said that she definitely has those books still around, sir. Yes, that they're in her library of some sorts.
That's right. They were in her study.
Yes, that's what it was.
You can't fathom how much those manuscripts could even be worth, could you, Mr. Cabrera?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't even try to calculate that. I'm more interested in just reading up on the old mystery author and the one-hit wonder. That's what I would be interested in.
Mr. Cabrera, let's talk now about why you're here today. The defendant,
yes.
Drew Mars, well, she called you and asked you to testify today.
Oh, yeah, we had a conversation about, some things that I had experienced in my time together. And yes, she did give me a call.
Right. That's
yes.
Just a yes to my question. She called and asked you to testify, correct?
She sure did.
And just to be clear, I think I heard you say this on your direct examination. Drew Mars, she's now your caretaker, right?
No, sir. I said she's pretty much like my caretaker as well. She gave me food, drove me around just like Agatha. It was just a saying, sir.
Gotcha. But you're saying that you two were close.
I wish that she helped me out a lot along with Agatha. Yeah, she's a very helpful woman, if you would imagine.
Well, let's go back to that conversation. After you agreed to testify today, the defendant asked if you wanted anything of Agatha's, right?
Well, she said that if she could help me out in any way and do me any favors, and just, if there was anything that memorabilia that I would want or like or anything like that, yes, we did have a discussion about that.
Gotcha. So just to be clear, I need a yes or a no here. The defendant asked so that they could help you out. I'm getting that right? That's what you said?
Well, she asked if I would like anything, sir. Yes, that's all she asked.
And you said you wanted the books in Agatha's study, right?
Yeah, I did tell her that. I felt that it'd be in much better hands with me. I don't even know if she knew about those books. I was excited.
Right, you were excited to get those unpublished manuscripts from the best author in American history. Yes or no?
Most definitely. I was ready to read them like no other. We had all read Death in a Bottle, but we was waiting on what was next.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
And thank you, sir.
Anything else, Mr. Beard?
Briefly.
Whenever you're ready.
Mr. Cabrera,
Yes.
counsel asked you a lot about those books in the study. Mr. Cabrera, if you do get those books, do you plan on selling them?
No, not at all. Like I said, I'm really more interested in keeping those as memorabilia of my friend Agatha and trying my best to keep up with some of the things that I hadn't seen before. Her works were very exciting to me.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Cabrera. At this time, I have no further questions.
Anything?
Oh, yes, thank you.
I assume the answer to that question is no. Very good. Thanks, Mr. Cabrera.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us to summations. I'm supposed to remind everybody to switch back to speaker view, and we'll hear a closing argument from the people. That plaintiff, sorry.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. The defendant was running out of time. Members of the jury, today you learned about Agatha Lee. You learned about a woman whose life was cut short before her time. To the world, Miss Lee was a famous writer, but to Stevie, this woman here was grandma. On August 15th, the world lost this famous writer, but Stevie lost all that was left of her family. And she didn't lose her grandmother because she was sick, not because she was getting too old, but because the defendant was running out of time. So she killed Agatha Lee. It's for these reasons we sued the defendant under the Slayer statute. That statute says any person who knowingly causes the death of another can't inherit from that person. So no one can murder another person and then inherit their entire fortune. We had to prove this to you by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning it's more likely than not that the defendant murdered Agatha Lee. And we've met that burden. And we've done so through those 3 points Mr. Miller introduced at the beginning of this trial. Why the defendant did this, how the defendant did this, and what the defendant left behind. So right now, I'd like to walk through each of those points. And the first is why. You heard it from the defendant herself. Her family needed that money. That she knew Agatha's money meant her family wouldn't worry about money ever again. But then Stevie Rogers showed up. And that was trouble for the defendant because Miss Rogers was getting along with her grandmother again. They were laughing, smiling, growing close, just like they used to be. On August 14th, the defendant's fears were confirmed when Agatha announced she was putting Stevie in the will and taking the defendant out. The defendant knew she was running out of time to stop that from happening. So she got in her car and she drove to the pharmacy. See, that brings us to our second point, how the defendant did this. After learning she was about to lose everything, the defendant went to the pharmacy. She purchased a bottle of chlorandramine between 12 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. She knew Miss Lee was allergic, and she knew Miss Lee would take any pill she handed her. So that night she snuck into Miss Lee's room. She swapped out that chloroandramine with that arthritis medication that looked identical. And Miss Lee died. Now the defendant thought her plan was foolproof, that everyone would see Miss Lee as an old woman who had passed away in her sleep. But Stevie knew different. Because Stevie knew her grandmother wasn't on the edge of death the night before she suddenly died. And Stevie remembered what the defendant said when Agatha promised to take her out of the will. The defendant said, "No way." There was no way she was going to let that happen. So Stevie knew something was wrong. She demanded an autopsy. She demanded a toxicology report. And when they confirmed chloroandramine, she knew exactly who was responsible. The defendant thought she'd gotten away with it. But that brings us to the third point. What the defendant left behind. A black bag. A bottle of chloroandramine pills used to kill Miss Lee. And she left behind a fingerprint on that bag. Now, one part of this trial stood out to me. It was when I was speaking to Drew Mars. I asked her about the reading of the will, how she stood up and said, "I had no idea she was going to inherit millions." The defendant admitted that was a lie. And that wasn't the only lie the defendant told. Because those attorneys, they asked Drew Mars about that bag that was sitting in her closet, and she said, "I've never seen it before." They kept asking her about that bag, and she said, "I've never touched it before." And that was a lie. Now, in just a few moments, the judge is going to give you some instructions. He'll tell you that it's your job, and your job alone, to decide if you can trust what the defendant said. You have the power to reject her words in their entirety. So ask yourselves, if we can't trust the words of the defendant, what's left? Mr. Rhyan Cabrera, the man who stands to gain the unpublished works of America's most famous mystery writer. We've met our burden. We've proven by a preponderance of the evidence the defendant murdered Miss Lee. And that's because of the evidence the defense can't explain. That fingerprint, that bag, that unexplained trip to the pharmacy. The defense has told you this other story. That Drew Mars was a loving and caring nurse who cared about Agatha more than anything. But ask yourselves, if the defendant was an innocent bystander, if she had nothing to do with what happened, why did she tell so many lies? Why did she take that stand and admit to 2 different lies she told during a police investigation? Well, we know the answer. Take the words of the defendant. She didn't want to give anyone a reason to think she did it. And members of the jury, that's because she did. She killed Agatha Lee because she needed that money. And she was running out of time to get it. Find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the defendant wish to sum up?
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready, Ms. Howard.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, Ms. Grieve, members of the jury. There is one thing that we need to address before we go any further here today. Before I respond to Ms. Grieve's closing, before I go through the evidence, before I address the weight of what the plaintiff is asking you to do. Before I do any of that, there is one thing that you and I need to be clear on. This, right now, us being in this courtroom today is the final step in Miss Rogers' plan. The plan that she's been carrying out against Miss Mars for the past 2 years. Miss Mars was the one in the way, because she was the one in the will. And that has to be addressed, because it means that every single piece of evidence that Miss Grieve just used to support her case was created and planted by the same people who just testified for her today. And that's a problem for the plaintiff, because they came into this courtroom with a burden to prove their case by a preponderance of the evidence. That means they have to prove to you that the most likely explanation for what happened to Miss Lee is that Miss Mars killed her. And the law is very clear. They have to do that with credible evidence, evidence that you can trust. Now, it's interesting that Miss Grieve talked so much about words that you can't trust in today's case. Because when you look at the plaintiff's evidence in context, when you look at the bigger picture, you see that their words can't be trusted. The words of their witnesses, Mr. Bond, Miss Rogers, the evidence that they presented you today is all a part of a bigger plan for Miss Rogers to get that inheritance for herself. So I want to go through that evidence with you today and talk about how it fits into that plan. So let's start off with talking about that 2018 will that Miss Grieve has just talked so much about. Because what the plaintiff wants you to focus on with that will is the fact that it had Drew Mars's name on it. Now, if we could zoom into that will right there, you'll see that it doesn't just have Drew Mars's name on it. There's a will that came before it with Stevie Rogers' name on it. And that's important. That's something that the plaintiff doesn't want you to focus on. Because it means that when Drew Mars was written into that will, Stevie Rogers lost over $20 million. So let's take a step back here and look at the timing of all of this. Because it's important that the first time Miss Rogers went to go see her grandmother in almost 10 years wasn't just right when she was written out of that will, it was right when her trust fund had run out. Members of the jury, it's not a coincidence that she decided to put things back together with her rich grandmother right when she went broke. The reason that she went to patch things up with her grandmother is because she wanted to be the one in that will. And we know that because that's exactly what they talked about within a month of her being there. But the thing is, Miss Rogers isn't telling the truth about how that conversation really went. Because we heard from every other witness today who testified about that conversation that Miss Lee wasn't going to give Miss Rogers a penny in that will. We didn't just hear that from Miss Mars, we heard that from Mr. Cabrera when he said that he was talking to Miss Lee after that meeting and she didn't say, "Oh, Stevie will be so happy, I'm going to put her back in the will." She said, "I hope Stevie forgives me." So then why? Would Miss Rogers lie about what happened in that conversation? Because if that conversation didn't go the way she said it did, all of a sudden, it's not Miss Mars running out of time. It's not Miss Mars with the motive here. It's her. Because she admitted on that stand today that she knew that if that conversation didn't go her way, she had another way that she could get that money. She knew about the Slayer statue. She knew that if she could frame Miss Mars for her grandmother's murder, then she could get everything. Miss Mars might have been the one in that will, but that statute was the one thing that could get her out of the way. So how do we know that Miss Rogers really did that? Well, because she didn't just know about that statute, she also knew about her grandmother's fatal allergy to chlorandramine. And when she found out about that allergy to chlorandramine, she wasn't just finding out a perfect way to kill her grandmother, she was finding out a perfect way to frame Miss Mars for it. Because Miss Mars was the one who told her. And she knew that if she bought that chlorandramine, that no one would be able to trace it back to her. Because that bottle, it doesn't have a label. It doesn't have a pharmacy that it was bought at. It's an over-the-counter medicine. They couldn't even find any fingerprints on that bottle to trace it back to anyone. So then how do we know that Miss Rogers used that chlorandramine? Well, because she showed her hand. Remember that Miss Rogers was the one who insisted on that toxicology report before anyone even mentioned that Miss Lee could have been murdered. And that's important because somehow Miss Rogers knew that Miss Lee was poisoned before the police even did. So either she was the best investigator, either she's the best investigator of all time or she had something to do with that murder. Members of the jury, she did have something to do with that murder. So why would she lead the police? Why would she lead the police in the right direction if she had something to do with that murder? Because she wasn't leading the police to herself, she was leading the police to Miss Mars. Because right when she was insisting on having that toxicology report, she was having Mr. Bond plant that chlorandramine in Miss Mars's room. I mean, let's think about this. Mr. Bond was being paid $30,000 by Miss Rogers for his help in this case. Mr. Bond was the only one who was alone in Miss Rogers' room on the morning after Agatha Lee's death. And it doesn't make any sense that that pill bottle would have belonged to Miss Mars. Because are we supposed to believe that Miss Mars went through the trouble of wiping down that pill bottle for fingerprints just to then stuff it in a bag right on the top of her closet? Are we to believe that even after Miss Mars was told that her room was going to be searched, that she would just keep that pill bottle in that bag in her closet for a week? It doesn't make any sense. What actually makes sense here is that Mr. Bond planted that chlorandramine in Miss Mars's room because Miss Rogers told her to. And only after Miss Rogers led the police straight to that drug. Members of the jury, this is the whole picture. This is what the plaintiff was supposed to show you. But when looking at the whole picture destroys the credibility of their evidence, they failed to meet their burden. Deliver a just verdict in this case. The only verdict that the evidence demands. Find for the one in the will. Find Miss Mars not liable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready.
If I might ask, could we just get thank you. To the defendant, Miss Lee was the one in the way. Members of the jury, you have heard no evidence Stevie Rogers purchased chlorandramine. You have heard no evidence Stevie Rogers had any contact with the black bag containing chlorandramine. The defense told you it was Stevie who committed this crime. Well, let's talk about what that would mean. That Stevie murdered the only family she had left, so she could frame Drew Rogers for a crime so that she could sue her in court for the chance of getting that money back later. That's not a reasonable story. Because the defendant isn't the loving, caring nurse she told us. Ask yourselves, if she cared for Miss Lee, why did she walk into that room on the morning of August 15th and not call 911? Why did that trained nurse with a bachelor's degree see a woman who was suffering from an allergic reaction and not call for help? Members of the jury, you know the answer to that question. We only call 911 right when we find someone who needs help if we want them to live. At the beginning of this trial, Mr. Beard told you that Stevie Rogers was the one who had someone in the way. But that's not true. Miss Lee was the one in the way. She was going to take away the defendant's house, take away those royalties, and take away the millions of dollars her family needed. Miss Lee was the one in the way. The defendant killed her because she was running out of time to get that money. Find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, very good. I will now charge the jury, which should take about 40 minutes or so. No, I'm just kidding. Well done, everybody. I think we have a court officer who's supposed to tell
Yes.
us